Elizabeth Broderick.
Betty Broderick.
Murder or manslaughter.
He was telling people I was crazy. I went crazy. I was like this, and you see pictures of me like this.
A La Jolla socialite gunned down her ex-husband and his new wife while they slept in bed.
Everything just came down on me, and I just couldn't stand it another minute.
I'm Stephanie Simmons, and this is the backstory of a double murder case that put San Diego in the global spotlight. A La Jolla stay-at-home mom and socialite shot and killed her ex-husband and his new wife while they slept in their bed. The murderous act turned Betty Broderick into a notorious and convicted killer, partly because she never seemed to show any remorse for what she did. The 1989 murders inspired several TV and film adaptations that all seem to tell the story of a woman scorned. Dan Broderick was a prominent medical malpractice attorney in San Diego who cheated on Betty with his assistant, Linda Colquina. Betty said because of Dan's influence in the legal industry, she never got a fair settlement in the divorce. Dan also got custody of their 4 children. He sold their joint property out from under her, then replaced Betty with a younger woman. The years of stress and what she called emotional abuse became too much for Betty to handle. So, on November 5th, 1989, she snapped. The case went to trial twice. Betty Broderick admitted to firing the gun, but a hung jury couldn't decide whether or not the murders were premeditated. She was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder in 1991. Over the years, she was repeatedly denied parole. Then she died while in custody on May 8th, 2026, at the age of 78. The story of Betty Broderick is one of love, a bitter divorce, and revenge. So, as we take a deeper dive into this history of the notorious case, I'd like to welcome former News 8 reporter Lorraine Kimel, who covered the Broderick case extensively as a journalist. Lorraine, we're so glad you are with us. You have so much knowledge about this case.
Happy to be with you.
So, if you think back all those decades ago, what happened? What can you tell us about the day when this news first came into the newsroom?
Well, from the mid-'80s on, when I became aware of this contentious divorce, I'd heard various things, some of them, in fact, from Dan and Linda, the couple who she killed.
You knew them
I knew
personally.
them because I dated one of Dan's good friends. And we had dinner a number of times. We vacationed in Mexico. And I remember I flew down with Dan. Linda had gone ahead with Dan, with the other gentleman and his family. And when I flew down with Dan, I thought, this man is obviously extremely bright. He was very attractive. And all weekend, Linda was absolutely, totally upset because Betty was, at the time, apparently throwing all these fits, driving her car into their house, leaving scurrilous messages on their phone machines, and all Linda wanted to do was marry Dan Broderick. Anyway, I stopped dating the friend of Dan Broderick, and a year later, I went into the newsroom on November 5th, 1989, and Sunday. So there was only one other reporter coming in later, and I went on the assignment desk, and I heard the assignment editor say, "Who was it?" That tells us in the news business something's happened to someone, and the cameraman radioed in. It was a lawyer and his wife, and I had heard everyone who kind of was at all social in La Jolla had heard Betty Broderick go around and say for years she was going to kill him.
But you knew Betty as well.
I had only met Betty once. I was at a Christmas party at her house exactly a year before the murders. I didn't realize it was her house. And when I went to thank the hostess for asking me, she said, "Oh, this is Betty's house." And having heard all about Betty from Dan and Linda for better part of a year, I asked, I asked to meet her, and she knew me from the news, and she was she was like a regular hostess at home. And in fact, she said, "You want a dog? I have a litter of puppies." And I wanted one at the time, as did another friend from the station. And we both went over and had a glass of wine with Betty Broderick. This was in December of 1988. Now we go ahead almost a year later, and I walked into the newsroom on November 5th, 1989, and here a lawyer has been shot. I said, what was the lawyer's name?
Oh, no. You knew.
And they said Dan Broderick. And you can imagine. I go down with the cameraman to the house in Marston Hills, I think that's the area of San Diego it's called, and saw the bodies being brought out. I mean, I think I'm still in shock.
It was the biggest murder case you've probably ever covered,
Well,
right?
it was the biggest murder case. B, I'd been on vacation with the dead people. I had had dinner a number of times, including in the house where they were shot. So if I say I kind of, after 3 days of covering this, including interviewing the ex-boyfriend, which was a friend of mine called him the heartbreak of psoriasis. But no, this reliving this whole thing, and like everyone else, in a way you thought, no way she's ever going to do it. On the other hand, I always felt that both Dan and Linda knew that this woman was capable of it.
Well, so let's separate the personal relationship for a second and talk about, because as people learn about this case, a lot of people are Team Betty and a lot of people are Team Dan. So as a journalist, what can you tell us as to why people would pick one person over the other on Betty was right in what she did, or Dan did terrible things, or Dan didn't deserve that and neither did Linda? What can you tell us about them as people?
Well, for starters, obviously, whether you're a journalist or not, one would obviously come to the conclusion no one deserved to die because a man chose to leave his wife.
But some scorned divorcees are Team Betty.
Absolutely. And there were men out there too who absolutely said they understood why she did it. The fact of the matter is, she did it. She admitted she did it. Then it came down to, in the first trial, which was a mistrial, they were deadlocked. They couldn't get a decision, and that's why it went to the second trial. But why would someone side with Betty? Someone who had, as you say, who had been scorned, who'd had a very difficult divorce, who'd had someone, in her eyes, treat her or him very badly. On the other hand, when it came out that she had a temporary judgment for $16,000 a month for alimony.
Back in the 80s.
In the 80s.
$16,000.
That was a lot of money.
And she had moved on with another guy as well. And for all intents and purposes, this Brad Wright fellow sounded like a very supportive, nice, people described him as a handsome fellow. And yet she still went after her revenge.
But here's the thing. In her mind, of course, she's put him through both law and medical school. She now has this life in La Jolla. They're up and comers. He had started making a lot of money, and it was taken away from her.
It was back at a time where women had to sacrifice their own goals for the better needs of their husband and their success. And here she raised 4 of their children, had a 5th child who unfortunately passed.
Right.
She gave up her whole life because she was attending college as well, was considered a bright, beautiful woman. And then after all that, he cheats on her and leaves her.
But again, it had happened to other people.
It had.
And did they go buy a gun, and did they shoot the 2 of them?
This is true. This is true. I mean, what drives someone, is murder ever right? Things like that. So one of the things, and we're so pressed for time, there's so many layers of this story. So I do want to move on to another component of this. Because of Dan's influence in the medical industry, but more importantly, in the industry of law, the legal system, everyone knew this man. In fact, the judge just about bowed to him when he was talking to him for other legal reasons before, obviously, the murder with the custody and things like that.
Right.
So Betty had said she had tried so hard to find a lawyer, and because of his dominance in this industry in San Diego County, she tried 60, 100 times to find someone to represent her, and then she ended up representing herself and felt like she had been just pushed out of a really decent settlement. In fact, we have a soundbite of Betty testifying in both trials. Let's hear some of what she had to say right now.
I threw all his clothes in the backyard and I put gasoline on them and I lit them. And I waited for him to come home for the home-cooked roast beef dinner he wanted for his birthday.
He kept telling me that I was sick and that I was crazy and I needed help. And he told the children that I was sick.
And how did that affect you?
It made me feel sick.
And I was just standing in that kitchen saying, Jesus Christ, I'm turning 42 years old. And I've been put through this bull since I was 35. 7 years of my life wasted. I was just a mess. Everything just came down on me. And I just couldn't stand it another minute. And that's what I wrote on the stuff, is I just can't stand this. I'm telling people I'm a child molester and I'm crazy and I'm an unfit mother.
I went into the room to talk to them or to wake them up or something, and they moved and I moved and it was over. I remember the real loud noise 5 times, but I didn't clearly remember it then. I just remember the noise.
Poignant testimony there. Up next, how the couple's children played a role in all of this and who took the stand. That's coming up after the break.
My mom called and said that she was in trouble, that she needed my help. And I asked why, and she said that she had shot my father.
When she indicated that she shot your father, can you tell us exactly what words she used?
She said, I shot your dad, I shot the son of a bitch. She said he said it himself, that one of us was going to have to die, and he said it, not me. And she said also that she felt empty and dead inside, and that she was so miserable that she couldn't go on another day.
Breaks your heart to hear a kid testifying on the stand against her own mother. That was Lee Broderick testifying against Betty Broderick, who murdered Lee's father and stepmom. She was one of 4 Broderick children and one of 2 who testified against their mother. So Lorraine Kimel back with us, former News 8 reporter. You covered this case extensively in the 80s and 90s. So tell us, as a journalist, how common is it in what you've seen in the past for kids to testify, and how does this impact a case, the emotional component of it all?
Well, you can imagine for the child. It just has to be brutal. And the kids have lived with this pull one way, pull the other way, with hearing these messages, with they see their father wants to move on. They see their mother is just, horribly, devastated. This actually, in my experience, was the only one that I ever saw. And, well, Lee had to testify because she was, I guess you'd say hearsay. Well, her mother called her.
To tell her what she'd done.
Yeah, to tell her. She left after Betty shot them, said she shot them. She pulled the phone out of the wall. She wrapped the wire around. Dan is still alive. She goes downstairs, drove up to a payphone someplace and called her daughter and said, I did it. I finally shot the SOB. Of everything in this whole case, and I was not a mother at the time, but boy, oh boy, I'll never forget thinking, she wanted Dan and Linda dead more than she wanted to take care of her kids.
For all intents and purposes, before it got that extreme, from documentaries on this, podcasts, even the dramatizations in TV and in film about this case and this story, Betty and Dan both appeared in all of those scenarios to be loving parents. Was that the sense that you got?
again, I saw Dan only once in the transfer of the kids. Betty, actually, it was the same thing. That was the only time I saw the two of them, when Betty was handing off the kids to Dan one day. But people will say that, Betty loved her kids and she just was the greatest soccer mom ever. However, she knew that her children were in Dan's house, and the kids said to her, "Mom, please stop leaving these messages. You won't be able to see us if you continue doing this."
She would leave erratic, very
more than
abusive.
erratic, the most scurrilous, disgusting, graphic about Linda.
On the
Messages
answering machine is what
on
you're
Dan and Linda's
Yes,
answering
what you're
machine.
speaking
And the
of.
children could hear it, and the children would say, the little boys would say, "Please don't do it. Don't do this, because you will not be able to see us and we won't be able to see you." So this is where I kind of diverge. And again, I have great empathy for people who are in any way abused. It is true Dan had the upper hand in the legal community. It was a small kind of Irish mafia that kind of was operating in San Diego at the time. These lawyers, a lot of them, they belonged to Sons of Ireland. They went to these dinners. There were just, a lot of these guys had made a lot of money very quickly. And, Dan was highly respected, well thought of. He was, very personable. And of course, you had this person on the other side of the aisle who was ranting and raving and carrying on obviously, with justification to a certain extent.
Right.
Did it justify murdering the two people, let alone the father of her children?
And then to get your kids on the stand as you have to listen to their depiction of what happened. So we just heard from Lee. Let's listen to Kim Broderick, another one of their 4 children, the eldest daughter, who testified about this. Let's hear her testimony.
She went to the garage and grabbed a can of gasoline and poured it all over him. And it was a huge pile of things. And all his underwear, she dumped out all the drawers over the balcony as well. And then she lit it with gasoline, and then she went and got black paint and poured it over all the ashes.
But the accounts of rage and fury didn't stop there. Kim said her mother once smeared cake on her father's bed and scrawled obscenities with lipstick on the mirror in his house. And another time when Betty drove into the front of his Marston Hills home.
The car came through the house. Not through the house, it hit the door, and it sounded like a chainsaw, and I ran out the back door.
To hear one of their children depict what happened. So what was the final straw as you were covering this case? What do you remember what you think it was?
It seems to me it was court papers about yet one more thing. And I just think the cumulative effect of these years of her losing her standing in La Jolla in her eyes and seeing him go off into the sunset with a woman who eerily, Linda, in her wedding dress, looked eerily like Betty had many years prior. The two of them, it looks like the same person. So here Betty sees this, and I think that she felt she had nothing to lose. And I think that she could rationalize, I must do this. She didn't think, what is the effect on my children?
Yes, and then losing custody, if you're a mama bear. Okay, we're going to stop for another short break, Lorraine, but when we come back, we're going to hear your interview with Betty in prison back in 1993. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. So the first trial of Betty Broderick ended with a hung jury. We mentioned that. The second trial ended in 2 second-degree murder convictions. Betty Broderick was sentenced ultimately to 32 years to life in prison. But when she walked out of that courtroom after the convictions, Betty was smiling with her head held high. So, Lorraine, tell me about that part. What struck you there?
I just think it was done. It was over. Her day was made when she killed him. Everything else after. And I guess, again, it was over. She knew it was done. They weren't coming back. And she didn't really care where she went, to tell you the truth.
Because it was done, as you
Because
said.
it was done. That was her goal. She was freed, I guess.
So let's talk about the next chapter. She's doing her time, and you had the opportunity to speak with her.
Right.
Let's take a listen to that conversation.
When you ask if she has any remorse, Elizabeth's response,
"Oh, well, remorseful about what? About my entire family and life being destroyed? Yeah, I'm real remorseful about, I have nothing left in life. And the family was all I cared about. So I'm very sorry that my entire family was destroyed, but I don't think my family was destroyed on November 5th, 89. My family was destroyed before that.
To you, what happened November 5th, 89?
I stopped it all. It ended. I mean, it just was over. Dan Broderick is the one who said it would never be over until one of us was gone. Well, it's over now.
That was in 1993. What were your thoughts after that conversation?
Well, I think, she said it. It's over. He's over. It's done. And again, kind of, I'll never get over that someone, now having a child of my own, but even before I had a child, I cannot get over that someone would sacrifice their own children. I will never be able to come to terms with that. Having said that, she was up for parole at least twice, and she would not say she was sorry. She had no remorse. She said it right there. She had no remorse because it was Dan's fault, and she took things into her own hands, and that was that. She was very, very, I think, very comfortable with it was done, it was over, and this is her life.
And it led to a rocky relationship with her children while she served time. However, they were all by her side when she passed away at the age of 78 just a few weeks ago. So that speaks volumes as well. Now, as you look back decades later about this, what stuck out the most to you? What had the lasting impact in your mind, possibly with the national attention and the national appeal of all of this?
I still can't get over the fact she clearly, if you from a non-professional, that woman was not within, did not have her faculties. She just could not stop. She couldn't control herself. And I once asked a defense attorney, why wouldn't you get an insanity plea? And they say it's hard to get that. And did she know what she was doing at the time?
She was on a mental hold at one point for a few days, but
that was for driving her car into his house.
It wasn't enough to do anything more than hold her for 3 days.
You know what? Of course, now in retrospect, could people have tried to get her help or more help?
And we look back on this so many years later.
And maybe a little less reaction from Dan and Linda too. Maybe a lot of maybes, but. A lot of people, there's no one who has ever been in love who hasn't been spurned.
Yeah.
And,
marriage, money, murder, revenge, all of it. Everyone loves to hear other people's dirty laundry, hence the national appeal probably there. Lorraine Kimel, former News 8 reporter, we certainly appreciate you being here and your insight. I'm Stephanie Simmons, and this is The Backstory.